government to order at this time. And I'll ask Madam Secretary if you could please call the roll. I know there are members that are on the Zoom link and taking part in the meeting that way. Please, when you go through the roll, let us know whether you're in your Frankfurt office or in your district as you answer the roll. And I also think that we've got a few that have been unmuted, so you'll have to unmute to answer the roll, but you may want to mute yourself back as soon as we're open. You up, Mark.
Senator Alvarado.
Present in the room.
Senator Harper Angel. Senator
Present
McDaniel.
remote off campus.
Senator McDaniel.
Present off-site.
Senator McGarvey.
I'm present from the district.
Senator Nemes.
Present in the room.
Senator Schroeder.
Present off-site. Thanks.
Senator Southworth.
Here in the room.
Senator Storm. Senator Thayer.
Here in the room, not on Zoom.
Senator Wheeler. Representative Bentley. Representative Bray.
Present in the room.
Representative Brown.
Present in my district.
Senator Carney. Representative Carney. Representative Dixon.
Present in the room.
Representative Donahue. Representative Fleming.
Present in the room.
Representative Frazier.
Present in the room.
Representative Huff.
Present in the 82nd district.
Representative Imes.
Present in the room.
Representative Johnson.
Present in the room.
Representative Koenig.
Present in the room.
Representative Lockett.
Here in the room.
Representative Marzian. Representative Meeks. Representative Miller. Representative Reed.
Here in the room.
Representative Roberts.
Present in the room.
Representative Thomas.
Present in the room.
Senator Mills.
Here in the room.
Representative Meredith.
Here in the room. We do have a quorum and are duly constituted to do business at this time. Since we do have some new members on the committee, I want to point out who all of our staff members are for the new members of the committee. We have our committee secretary, Cheryl Walters, legislative analyst Joe Pincheski-Lee, and CSA Mark Mitchell. And we also had a retirement right after session and prior to us starting the interim. John Ryan, we want to wish him a wonderful retirement. He worked with the committee since 2007, and he wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren, and we just want to wish him the best in his retirement and thank him for his service to the committee over the years. This time we'll start with the agenda. We're going to move a little bit out of order as the day goes along today. We are going to start with Commissioner Rand and his group to bring forth the administrative regulation. You all please identify yourselves for the record and then proceed.
I am Rick Rand, Commissioner of Housing, Building, Construction in the Public Protection Cabinet, and
Max Fuller, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Max Fuller, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Housing, Buildings, and Construction.
Ready? We're here today to present to you all an administrative regulation that deals with virtual inspections for our plumbing division. The regulation really comes about for two reasons. Number one, you know, with COVID, it sort of prompted us to look at other ways that we can be in and out of people's homes in the most safe and efficient manner possible. And from industry, who had been asking us for a long time, are there other ways that we can inspect plumbing, like water heater installations, even line installations. It gives them the opportunity to know that an inspection will occur timely. Maybe they have something ready at the end of the day that needs to be done so they can continue working the next day. And so we have brought this inspection on. It is permissive. We're not requiring anyone to do it if they don't want to, a contractor, but if they do, then we will actually, give them some training and the ability to know exactly what the requirements are and how they are expected to conduct themselves. So that is a brief explanation. I'll let Max add anything to that he would like, with your permission, Mr. Chair.
Sure. This is, as Commissioner Rand stated, something that the department's been working on for quite some time. We're utilizing the Division of Plumbing sort of as a pilot program to make sure that this is going to operate in an efficient and safe manner. Hopefully, it does, and once that happens, we're going to explore the option of doing this for other divisions as well.
With that, Mr. Chair, we'll be happy to take any questions.
Do we have questions from any members of the committee at this time? Representative Bentley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this just because of the COVID crisis?
Not just because. It probably prompted us to push ahead with it, Representative Bentley. It's primarily industry driven. They have been asking us for a long time, and other areas are as well. As Max, Deputy Commissioner Fuller mentioned, we're doing plumbing first, but we have other industry partners that we have, HVAC, that are looking to do that. It just allows us, I think, to do our inspections more timely. We only do it for certain things. Complicated things, obviously, we do not. But I think the COVID probably did prompt us to really work on it and move it forward.
Follow-up, Representative Bentley.
Well, the follow-up is, if we're doing it just because of a virus, plumbers deal with things like E. coli, which are an Enterobacter already all the time. So that's not an argument. If you're a microbiologist or a person who knows how to keep universal precautions, and most plumbers do. So what's the other reason?
Well, the other reason is industry has really prompted us to do it. That is the primary reason, that they feel that they can be, it will be better for them because what we'll be virtually inspecting are fairly simple things: connections, plumbing connections, water heater installations, those sorts of things, and they believe that it will help them complete their work quicker, that it'll allow our inspectors to be there or them to do it with us virtually, and they'll be able to move forward in a more efficient manner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bray?
First of all, I'm in favor of anything that kind of speeds up the inspection process, but what is a virtual inspection going to look like?
We have David Moore, who's our division director, and I think he could probably give a little bit more detail.
Come right over here, David.
Basically, what
Identify yourself, David.
David Moore, I'm the director of Division of Plumbing and acting director of HVAC. Basically, what virtual inspection looks like is using resources such as Skype, Messenger. We can do phone-to-phone, live, and in constant communication with that contractor. And you can walk through the entire process. Water heater installation, for example, they're in existing homes. This allows us a means to be less invasive to somebody's home because the contractor can show up, install the water heater. He could call us up as soon as he's done. We look at it right there while he's there. The installation, the inspection, everything's completed in one process. There's not a situation where the homeowner's having to take off from work or try to make the home available so an inspector can get back in and make that type of inspection. We're already doing virtual inspections on a lot of buildings that are built out of state, where it's not as efficient for us to travel out of state to do these inspections on a lot of these buildings that are coming into the state of Kentucky. The plant can call us up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we go through the complete building with them that morning. So, and if they have a problem, we identify the problem, they fix it, and they call us back. So we've got some experience of doing this. This is just reaching out to the contractors here in Kentucky. This requires them to take some training so that we can prepare them for what's going to be required to be able to do these.
Representative Frazier?
Hi, thank you. And this
No, go ahead. I'm fine.
regulation came through the committee already, so I've been heavily involved in this, and so I appreciate the cabinet working with me on some of these changes, but I did want to ask a clarification question. So is GPS required to be turned on so we can ensure that the fixture or the unit that they are inspecting is actually the one that is at that address that's on the permit?
They're going to have to prove to us that they're at the current address. Once they turn on the program and they walk up to that address, they're going to show us the address of where it's at and walk through it in a continual time. I don't know that if it's a GPS-driven system, because right now we've not dialed it down to one explicit system that everybody has to use, because with technology today, everybody uses something different. Or either use Messenger, Skype. You know, I found out with these different plants, a lot of it's going to depend on how good of a connection they've got. You know, there's so many variables that's going to depend. And basically going to boil back down to the inspector as well. If they send it into the inspector and the inspector doesn't feel comfortable that the quality that he's being given is enough for him to make a qualified inspection, then he's always got that opportunity to say, no, I can't do it this way. I'll be to see you. We'll do this as a live inspection. This I'm leaving it on the inspector to be able to look at that and say, yes, I can either do it this way, or no, this one's not got enough. I can't see well enough, or for whatever reason. I'll just come straight on out there and do it. But what this does is, like I said, for water heater inspections, for water, sewers, a lot of this stuff that instead of an inspector driving 60 miles to do one sewer line inspection that may be 10 foot long, he would be able to walk through this and do this pretty simply. It doesn't take a lot.
Thank you.
Senator Nemus.
Yes, are you keeping these virtual inspections on file to be
Yes,
reviewed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Southworth.
We get a little better handle on what type of thing would be subject to a virtual inspection? Because I'm listening to this thinking, low resolution cameras, video is very, very low resolution anyway, particularly through Zoom and things. It's hard to see. And you just mentioned if the inspector can't see well, then they would schedule for a regular one. And I'm just thinking, it sounds to me like it's almost one of those things of, in the real world, people say, what's the point of the inspection? They didn't really do anything. Is this just a layer? And so we're trying to simplify the layer without removing it when it probably needs removed? Or obviously some things really do need to be looked at, and I'm just trying to get an idea of where we're using this and where we're not.
No, I just want to make clear that nothing that I see us trying to do at this point is trying to delegitimize the necessity for the inspection. And that's why I put it back on the inspector to look at this. If they submit it to him and there's any question to what he's seeing, or it's not complete clarity to what he's seeing, he does not have to take this. This is an option. He can deny the inspection upon the request of the inspection being requested, and then go out and do it as a live inspection. There's so many variables when you try to dial it in. Like we had discussions previously about, well, let's not do finals. Well, what happens to that lady that just got out of school and she's trying to put in a beauty shop and all she's got is one shampoo bowl? And if they could submit that and do that as a final inspection and do it as a virtual, that's something that very easily can be done. But as far as doing a final, going out and doing a hospital or a school or something to that degree, no, that's not going to be done. But when you say when you put in language to try to take out all finals, then you take out the real small projects that are very well capable of being done that way. Trying to limit it per openings. I've got houses built out of state that we do now that are more than 10 openings. So when you get into that language, then it also, you're trying to take out language that will inadvertently reflect on stuff that we're already doing and have been doing for quite some time. Like I said, that we've been doing virtual inspections for several years. This is not our first issue with it. This is just basically what this does is we're requiring training for the contractors to show them exactly what we expect them to submit us when they're submitting. So they'll have a good idea of whether they can do it as a virtual inspection or not.
One final question, Representative Frazier, and then we're going to move on to our other topics for the day.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the comment about final inspections, because that was something that was added in the version when it passed our committee, is that there would be no final inspections.
Was that added to it?
On new construction.
On new construction, yes. What I'm talking about, Ms. Frazier, is these additions on where you're just adding one shampoo bowl on and stuff. If you take it out totally, then you wouldn't be able to do them. And we do a lot of those type of inspections.
Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you all for being here. We have done our statutory obligation to review the regulation. We appreciate your all's testimony.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we will bring up Chief Jones. As you come up, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning and thank you all. Good morning and thank you all. My name is Adam Jones. I'm the Fire Chief of Butchell Fire Protection District in Jefferson County. I also represent the Jefferson County Fire Chiefs Association, and I'm here to discuss some funding through the American Rescue Plan. Fire protection districts took a financial hit on many fronts over the past 16 months related to the pandemic itself. Coronavirus funding programs in the past did not cover specifically Chapter 75 fire protection districts throughout the Commonwealth. Most Chapter 75 districts in Kentucky did not receive any CARES money at all, and other funds were not defined as funding for Chapter 75 districts. Districts across the state had increased PPE costs due to the shortage of supplies and the increase of cost, especially those fire districts that operate ambulances, obviously. In Jefferson County, these losses included, on top of this, was the PVA's decision to delay reassessments last year, which is what our property taxes are based on in our revenue, including also freezing all business increases for this current year. That's the main source of revenue for all Chapter 75 districts is property tax. Districts who operate ambulances also took heavy increased costs from PPE, but also we assisted local government and state government in COVID testing sites, vaccine centers, with no recovery of funding for those time and services rendered. The concern that we have is the fire protection districts appear to be specifically eligible for the American Rescue Plan Act funds, but we need lawmakers to enact that. Chapter 75 districts continue to operate in our communities throughout the pandemic without delay, and now we ask you to help us recover some of the losses that we incurred to help our communities throughout the state. We want to avoid any increase of taxes to our residents, which I'm aware some districts are considering if they're not at the cap that has already been set and established. Most agencies are at that cap. It is unclear how Chapter 75 fire districts and their employees would be able to access these funds if it's not defined by lawmakers. Also, the premium pay for eligible employees is only for employees designated by the governor, and those to maintain the continuity of operations essential to critical infrastructure. It's my belief that our first responders were as essential as anyone during the past year, and our work never stopped or delayed when called upon. In closing, on behalf of Chapter 75 fire districts across the state, we are asking you to help us recover some of the losses from the American Rescue Plan. For our fire districts that lost so much and our employees who gave so much, thank you for offering me this time to address this need for our community and the districts across the Commonwealth. Again, thank you for the time. I'm open for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you, Chief Jones.
Thank you very much for your time.
Moving forward, I think we can go ahead and bring both our folks from the Kentucky Association of Counties and from the Kentucky League of Cities together. I think, JD, you have a PowerPoint presentation we're going to start with and then go into presentations from both of you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm J.D. Cheney. I'm the Executive Director, CEO of the League of Cities.
And I'm Jim Henderson, the Executive Director of CAECO.
We appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan Act funds that our local governments received. We have a whole lot to talk about, but we're gonna do it in the time limit. 3 or 4 major points that I think you want to take away from your understanding of the act. One, we're extremely grateful that the federal government decided to do a one-time appropriation for all 19,000 cities, towns, villages, boroughs throughout the entire country, along with every county. We haven't seen anything like that before, and that will help our cities and counties. But the second major point I think we want to make is that this is not a panacea. This doesn't fix lingering policy issues. These are one-time funds that won't be reoccurring. And that issue will keep coming up, I think, as we go along when we talk about how this money can be spent with the constraints that the federal government and the U.S. Department of Treasury has put on cities and counties in the expenditure of the funds. This is a lot different than the CARES Act funding. That was a reimbursement basis type of program. This is an appropriation. We're not in a rush here to meet a looming deadline. When we were trying to get CARES funding, we had to make application by December 31st or December 30th, 2020. That ended up being extended, and so there was a rush, and local officials were rushed to try to get their reimbursements in and expenses in so they could get the reimbursement. With this act, we have until December 31st, 2024 to spend or obligate. If we obligate it prior to December 31st, 2024, this funding, we have until into 2026 to make the expenditures. So this can be this should be a very deliberative process with the local governments on how they spend their allocation. They have time to engage their constituency. They have time to collaborate with other cities in the county, their county governments. And those are all things that you'll see. I won't speak for Jim, but you'll see KLC, KCO, I guess I will speak for you, KLC, KCO, the ad districts, the Department for Local Government, and those that advise and counsel our cities and counties to take their time, because this is going to be an evolving process. We have a lot of unanswered questions from the United States Department of Treasury. They're updating their FAQs, their interim final rule as we go along. So this will be a training process that will have to continue. To that extent, we've all created web resource links for local officials so they can see updated information. Ad districts and others are putting on training sessions so local officials can understand all of these constraints. And then I'll do this PowerPoint, but those are the 3 major points I think we want to make. Mark, I may not have done this correctly. Let's see. That's got it. I got it. Sorry about that. For city governments in particular, ours is going to look a little different than what Jim's going to explain with county governments. We have 9 cities in Kentucky that qualify as metropolitan cities or entitlement communities that generally get their CDBG appropriations directly from the federal government. 9 of those in Kentucky, and those include the obvious, Lexington, Louisville, but Elizabethtown, Owensboro, Bowling Green, Henderson are all on that list of in Hopkinsville, Representative Walker, are all on that list of getting direct appropriations from the United States Department of Treasury, much like the county governments, and I'll let Jim explain that group. Then we have another subset, about 405 cities in Kentucky are non-entitlement cities, and that money is going to flow through the Department for Local Government. It's again different than the CARES Act where we had to make reimbursement requests. It's functioning more, I think DLG would agree, to call it more of a flow-through basis. And that's what Congress directed the states to do. I think the governor's designated the Department for Local Government to flow that money through. They have some administrative responsibilities in doing that. They have to ensure the city's allotment of these 405 cities is not greater than 75% of its previous budget. That's probably going to hit 10 to 15 cities where they got an allotment bigger than 75% of their budget. That's the amount of money we're talking about. So they got to certify that. They got to ensure compliance with the executed agreements, Title VI compliance, and other documents. So that's in process, and I'll commend the Department for Local Government, Billy Johnson, Matt Stevens, and their staff over there have done an excellent job of communicating with the 405 other cities besides those entitlement communities in getting that out. If you look at the total awards, 607 to the big cities, to the entitlement communities, 607 million, 324 million available for the 405 non-entitlement cities. In your packet, I believe you have an estimate and breakdown of what every city in Kentucky will receive under this agreement. Now, the non-entitlement communities are population-based, whereas the entitlement communities was based on the formula related to CDBG that takes into account income and other factors besides population. So a lot of people look at that list immediately when we sent out the estimates. The folks from Owensboro, Representative Johnson, called and said, how in the world is Covington getting twice as much money as Owensboro? And that entitlement formula with CDBG is not purely based on population. So that explains some of those discrepancies. 6 major areas of utilization. And again, let me emphasize, this is ongoing process where we get more guidance from Treasury. And I think the longer communities wait, the more precise that guidance will be from Treasury. I know air phones are blowing up. And I think Keiko can testify to that as well. That we're getting calls. Can we do it to buy the backhoe to dig the sewer line? Can we use it for this or that purpose? And until the guidance gets a little more substantive, a little more meat on the bones, I think you're going to see a real cautious approach to the expenditure of these funds. They don't want to mess around with having the federal government claw back any of these funds. So more particular guidance is needed. Just briefly on these 6 major categories, supporting the public health response is the first category designated for the expenditure of the funds, and that can be used. It looks more similar to what the CARES Act did on any broad range of public health needs. That includes medical expenses on both medical and behavioral health, including substance misuse, payroll for essential workers. That's going to be a little more difficult because it has to be spent March 3rd going forward on essential workers for their work in mitigating the impact of COVID. Well, we're coming out of this pandemic, so I don't think that's going to be a highly utilized area. But vaccine, public relations, public communications effort, tracing. Also, one we're getting a lot of questions on under this category is capital investments in public facilities to meet pandemic operational needs and ventilation improvements. So that one, that's probably going to be the most utilized area rather than seeing the payroll like you did under the CARES Act. Second broad category was addressing the negative economic impacts of the health emergency. That's unemployment aid, household assistance such as food, rent, burial assistance, cash aid. We've gotten that question a lot from city officials. Can we give a local stimulus check? And the answer under the guidance is yes, as long as it's in proportion to the harm experienced with the pandemic. The guidance spends quite a bit of time talking about the ailing businesses that are involved in tourism and hospitality, rehiring public staff to their pre-pandemic levels, completion of any planned expansion of tourism projects that were delayed due to the pandemic all fall under that category broadly. Then the third area is targeting low-income communities. This is a priority of the Washington administration, I believe, to hit qualified census tracts. If a population or geographic area has been disproportionately impacted as a result of the pandemic, they can do community health, homelessness assistance, affordable housing, early learning, child care investments in those disproportionately impacted communities. And then fourth category would be the recoupment of lost revenue. This sounds really good, that if a city or county lost a bunch of money as a result of the pandemic, then we'd be able to capture that revenue and plow it back into the general fund and spend it. Treasury's guidance has made this process a little complicated, and there are some issues with that. You have to calculate at 4 points in time what your losses of revenue are. You can assume a growth rate of 4.1%, which is going to be good for some Kentucky cities and counties using the national average. Or the greater, if it's greater, looking at the growth in the budget from fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, the 3 years immediately preceding the pandemic, and use that as your multiplier factor. If a city does that calculation on December 31st, they can do it immediately for December 31st, 2020. They'll do it again in 2021, 2022, and 2023. If that mathematical formula shows that there's a drop or decline in revenue, there's an assumption that anything less was pandemic related, they can capture that revenue and put that directly into any governmental service. It is the least restrictive mechanism for collecting that revenue and spending these funds, but it has some shortfalls. If a city or county raised their taxes during the pandemic or exhausted their surplus funds, this money won't account for a tax increase. It won't account for any depletion of rainy day funds as a result of that. The fifth major category, premium pay for essential workers. This is one area where the Treasury has encouraged a retroactive look back. It's one that I think that cities are looking at pretty hard before they dive into this, because, again, emphasizing the fact that it's one-time money, but it authorizes you to pay essential workers, which are all your public safety, community health workers, nursing home workers, grocery workers. But for the city government employees or county government employees, mainly it's going to encompass public safety, some sanitation workers, and it allows you to do up to $13 an hour, up to $25,000 per employee to do pay for essential workers. It allows the CEO of a city or county to designate other essential workers beyond that which is listed in the Treasury interim final rule as well. There are some limitations on that. It's one-time money. It allows you to look backwards. I think we're going to have to get a lot of additional guidance on that to get some comfort level, at least with city leaders that I've talked to this point, about using it there. And then the sixth major category really doesn't touch on related to the pandemic as much as the first five do, and that is to make direct investments in sewer, water, and broadband infrastructure. And those are pretty broad. For water, it allows for use of projects, pandemic-related or not, anything consistent with the the federal Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. For sewer, the Federal Clean Water State Recovery Revolving Fund, which includes the construction, treatment, transmission, distribution. For sewer, it allows stormwater work. And then for broadband, it encourages the use of these local funds to extend out to unserved or underserved areas in the community as well. And there's some limitations on that, and I won't take up budget director's discussion on the use of what you all did as a General Assembly. It is very clear under this act that you cannot use these funds, the city or county cannot use these funds to shore up any unfunded liability in a pension plan. That does not, a lot of local governments have legacy pension plans, but that does not forbid them from using normal employer contributions for payroll if they do any of these payroll extensions or premium pay as well. You can't pay off outstanding debt that existed pre-pandemic. That's forbidden use explicitly under the Act. You can't settle that pesky lawsuit to do legal settlements or pay any judgments on a lawsuit. You can't use it for financing expenses for the incurrence of new debt or to replenish a depleted rainy day fund. And then the money cannot be used. Cities and counties won't be able to use the money for matching any non-federal match requirements. Now that's going to work differently with the money that you all appropriated, and Budget Director Hicks, I believe, will cover that. That's not considered a federal grant program, so this money could be used in conjunction with the money that you all appropriated last session before you all adjourned. And the challenges related to these things that we're waiting on, the formula looks at only general revenues. It includes all taxes, rental, concessions fees, things of that nature, but it doesn't look at lost utility fees. So we can't calculate that in lost revenue, and that was a big deal for us, as Representative Bray knows, during the pandemic. The formula will penalize cities or counties both here that raise their taxes, that took action to deplete their rainy day funds or to otherwise raise their revenue because that will not be included in the revenue shortfall. We're making these points during this opening period with the Department of Treasury through our national associations as well, but we're directly doing that for Kentucky cities to say, here's how this is working and impacting us there. And some other issues are the utility thing that we pointed out before. This isn't going to be able to pave roads or streets unless you capture some of that lost revenue. It doesn't address that transportation. We got water, sewer, and broadband. Only if you capture lost revenue are you going to be able to use it for any general governmental service, which could be to pay a public safety salary or do some minor streets and road work in your community. But it's not a specific allocation either. The reporting requirements are not entirely clear. This is a look-forward basis from March 3rd, 2021, and a lot of the expenditures that are permitted are really tied to pandemic-related at a time when we're coming out of the pandemic. So these limitations are going to be pretty difficult until a lot of these issues are addressed. And then the issue with the documentation and reporting, I think DLG will tell you we're waiting patiently for Treasury to give us some additional examples of how and put more meat on the bones of the rules and the FAQs so we can determine how we're going to have to report, because everything in this act tells you have to show how there was a disproportionate impact, how it was tied to COVID. So how we're going to prove many of these things in our federal reporting. Our reporting goes directly back to the Department of Treasury. We're waiting on those, so it leaves a lot of open questions going forward. 38 comments, questions Treasury asked in its proposed rule that they ask cities and counties to answer, so we know it's going to look a lot different as it goes through the process. We have till July 16th to get those comments in. We have a lot of questions that haven't been answered. So I think over the course of the next 3.5 years, I think it's safe to say, which is our deadline for at least obligating these funds, there's going to be a whole lot of educational effort and a whole lot of change from what we know today based on the Treasury guidance. With that, I'll turn this PowerPoint off and yield to Jim Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, what he said. I saw JD's slide last week, and I knew that he would cover the basics of the details, and so they're pretty much the same for cities and counties with regard to eligibility, uses, etc. I do want to introduce quickly a couple folks on my team that are here who are more of the experts in-house at CAECO. You all know Shelley Hampton, our Director of Government Affairs, who's here to answer questions if needed. And then Jennifer Burnett, some of you may not know Jennifer as well. She's our Director of Policy, Research, and Communications. I've kind of tasked Jennifer as being our CAECO expert on all things ARPA, and she and our legal team are kind of working through all the details to be the point folks for this. Judge Gary Moore was supposed to be able to join us today. As many of you all know, Boone County Judge Moore is president of the National Association of Counties, and he's actually on the podium, probably on the podium at the podium right now, speaking at the Mississippi Association of Counties meeting, and was sitting with the Lieutenant Governor at the same time that we were having this hearing today, so I don't think he's going to be able to join us. As JD has said, the Treasury guidance continues to develop. That is the thing that most counties are waiting on, is to see if whether or not Treasury may loosen up guidance on how to use these funds going forward. As I said, most of the eligible uses are the same for cities and counties. I might explain briefly the differences in the allocation or the distribution. And again, Judge Moore was very instrumental in this, working on behalf of counties nationally, 3,069 counties. The CARES Act, as JD mentioned, that came out last year, was absolutely an immediate reaction, an actual relief act that was passed bipartisan support in the Congress, as you all know, and a quick reaction to COVID. And there were a lot of details that weren't in the federal legislation. The intention of that law was to have a lot of that money trickle down to local governments. Unfortunately, that wasn't written in specifically. Only counties or communities over 500,000 actually got direct allocations out of CARES Act. And so in Kentucky, only Jefferson County got a direct allocation. We were very fortunate. JD and I immediately went to work after that bill passed, working with the governor's office here. And Kentucky was very fortunate in that our governor did make a decision to allocate $300 million of CARES Act funds directly to cities and counties last year. And we had a lot of counties and cities use all of those funds all the way through the end of the year and even into the first 3 months of this year working with DLG. So we were fortunate in Kentucky. In a lot of other states, however, the federal funds never made it down to local governments. They didn't make it into a direct allocation for cities and counties. And so this round of the ARPA Act, both NLC, the National League of Cities, and NACO, the National Association of Counties, worked tirelessly to make sure that counties and cities didn't get left out this time. And so the direct allocations were a big part of our two organizations nationally working to make sure local governments got a portion of these funds. 3,069 counties all are getting a direct allocation coming directly from U.S. Treasury. As JD mentioned, the way the cities distribution, there's a lot more cities, and only the larger cities are getting their direct allocation. But every county in the country is getting a direct allocation. $65 billion was set aside for counties, $65 billion set aside for cities in the federal package. And I like to quote Judge Moore, and most of you in this room will agree with his sentiments. You know, I don't know anybody was crazy about the idea of growing the national debt by another $2 trillion. And most local governments, I think, would agree with that. His position on behalf of counties across the country was that the Congress was going to pass $2 trillion. The president was committed to a near $2 trillion package. Our organization's roles nationally was to make sure as much of those dollars as could be find their way down to counties and cities. And so Judge Moore worked on behalf of counties to make sure that we got a portion of those funds. So $65 billion nationally. In Kentucky, $868 million in direct allocation to Kentucky's 120 counties. And so those funds, again, are coming directly from U.S. Treasury. Every county was able to apply, the way that the law was set up, 60 days after the passage and signature by the president, counties could make a request for their first half of the total allotment. And so sometime in mid-May, counties were able to go on to the federal portal and apply for those funds. And many counties have already gotten 50% of their allocation. Their second 50% will be available no sooner than 12 months from the date of the first. So a year from now, most counties will be able to draw down the final 50%. All of this information is, we've been driving all of our county folks to our website, caco.org, kaco.org. It's very easy. All the information that's there, it shows the breakdown of the allocations for counties. It shows the 150 pages of U.S. Treasury guidance that's been given, the summary given by NACO on behalf of our members, a list of frequently asked questions, and we continue to update that regularly. I was telling DLG staff person Billy Renee Johnson earlier, you know, the beauty in getting these funds directly to counties, also has a little bit of a disadvantage in that there is no state agency per se to call and ask, can I do this, can I do that? This entirely rests within the purview of the counties to decide how the projects fit within the federal guidance. We're trying to be a resource at CAECO, but we're very careful not to say you can do this, you can't do that. We sure don't want to have that be the reason somebody does something and it be wrong. So we have certainly encouraged caution and patience, and as JD said earlier, be very deliberative about the use of these funds. Again, for us, we're encouraging a lot of our folks to just wait and see, as the hope is that Treasury may loosen up a little bit of the guidance as time goes on. The big thing for counties, I think, out of the list that JD mentioned of eligible uses that we're trying to drive our members to, because we think they're very black and white, and you probably can clearly do these things without worrying too much around the edges, are broadband, water, and sewer. It's pretty clear that those are eligible things that you can use these funds for. As JD said, these are one-time dollars. These are investment dollars. They can't backfill holes in your budget. They can't deal with systemic issues on funding for jails or transportation or anything else. These are one-time dollars. And so I personally am encouraging my fellow county officials, no longer can I say fellow county officials to think about investing these funds. I know Leader Thayer that Scott County, Judge Covington, they've been having a very serious conversation about broadband expansion in their community for a while. This would be an opportunity to leverage some of these dollars for things like that. Different from counties and cities, or different from cities, not many counties are directly involved in the water and the utility business. In counties, it's usually a water district, a rural water district, sometimes multiple water districts that are actually the ones who are running water lines out in the county. Same for sewer, sanitation. In fact, in many cases, it is the city sewer that's actually out in the areas outside the city limits servicing those areas. So water and sewer gets a little trickier for counties. It'll take a lot of collaboration between the local leaders to figure out how to do that. But those are the areas that I think are of the highest, best use for most of our counties. Again, not a lot of answers yet. The first reporting requirements that counties have, I think, is in August. Is that right? And again, our counties will report directly to the U.S. Treasury. And as JD said, we've got until December of 24 to obligate the funds, till December of 26 to spend the funds. And so again, we're urging patience. I think in the interest of time, I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to entertain questions, we're glad for that.
I do have a couple of questions. First, and I'll start with you, Jim. And we didn't ask for this specifically, but I'm sure Jennifer has it. Could we get a listing county by county of the first run funds and the second run funds and a grand total per county sent out to the members of the committee so that everybody knows what allotment their counties will be receiving, like we got for the cities?
Yep, absolutely.
I didn't figure that would be a problem, but I wanted to mention it. You also mentioned this water and sewer issue, and this probably is a question for both of you all. I think it's a little bit easier for cities because most of the time they have a municipal utility, or a lot of times they do. With regard to those water and sewer funds, and if you all have a rural water district, something like this, is it going to be a position where you all are able to divvy some of those funds to that water and sewer district? Are you all going to have to fund the infrastructure and then turn the infrastructure over to them? Do you all have any idea on that at this point in time?
I'm not sure that there are answers to those questions yet. We actually were talking earlier, Billy Johnson and I, about the different rules with CARES Act, because those were not federally outlined as to what you can or can't do. We could actually share. There was some conversation between cities and counties about sharing. Perhaps you could have shared them with other political subdivisions within the county. It's not, I don't think, clear yet whether or not a county could actually give those funds to something like a water district, or whether they would have to build and own. Those are parts of the questions that we continue to ask. So
it goes to the fire chief's testimony about being able to access funds at least through the local government. Of course, the state has its own allocation, but without a lot of meat on the bones again, with that guidance, there is a general authorization to transfer these funds to special units of government, which would likely include utility commissions, special districts, special fire districts. However, the language in there says that the city or county, it's treated like a grant. It's a sub-recipient on a grant. Remains obligated to do the reporting. So again, we're going to have to get some additional guidance from Treasury, but at least that possibility, is that fair to say? That possibility is there for collaboration with those special units of government.
And I think that led into, and you've pretty much answered my third question, but with regard to the fire districts, and not just fire districts, but ambulance taxing districts in our Commonwealth as well, it appears to me that if anything happens, they're going to have to ask the county or cities that they serve for a piece of that allotment. If they may be an eligible recipient through that, but it's going to have to be going to the fiscal court, going to the city commission, city council to ask for a piece of that allotment somehow or another. And that's correct, I think, according to what you just said.
Either that or the state.
Okay. Other questions from members of the committee? Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is for JD. And first, I'll say thank you to both of you for this presentation. It's very informative. JD, you touched briefly on the way that some of the funds can be used. You mentioned tourism projects. Can you just expand that a little bit? What does that involve? Is it reimbursement for lost revenues, or is it projects that were being done and stopped, or where are we on that?
I sure do wish I could. I wish the guidance was more particular. I think what we know from the guidance, Representative Johnson, is that it says if you've had a planned expansion, say a bluegrass museum or something along.
Your mic may be
on. My mic's off. Sorry about that. A bluegrass museum or something like that was going to be built or expanded. I know you all are further along than that on your museum, but it was stopped due to the pandemic. It does say anything that was delayed due to the pandemic, the money could be spent directly for that. Under that special unit of the government, if you have a tourism commission, for example, is a special unit of the government that lost revenue as a result of the hospitality tax, the transient room tax going down, hypothetically, under the guidance at this point, you could transfer it to the tourism commission. The city or county that did the transferring would remain responsible for the reporting to ensure that it was used for one of the major purposes, which in this case would be replacement of lost revenue. But Treasury has not drawn that line out clear. Is that fair to say? I'm going to look at the CAECO experts. Treasury has not drawn that line out specifically, but it looks like right now that's probably the way it's headed.
Okay, what about any lost revenues for events that were scheduled but canceled?
When you're looking at lost revenue, you have to measure across the entire entity. So you can't say, okay, a city government here made $500,000 a year from renting its convention center. It only made $100,000. You got to look at the income across the entire city or county government, or in this case, hypothetically, it would be the tourism commission that you were asking about. So you can't look at specific line items. You got to measure revenue across, and again, I'll keep pointing out that does not include revenue from utility operations.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. JD, I want to dovetail what you just said in terms of looking at things in totality. And Jim, if you can chime in as well. You know, in business, you go through situations of loss of revenue, loss of employees, impact on your product, impediments on your service, and so forth. And so as somebody who would run a business or in management of business, you have to go through and assess where you are and what's going on and say, first of all, is this necessary? Is it critical? And what does it do? So based on that, given the pandemic had a significant impact on city and county governments, what is your impression or what you have heard some of these mayors and county judges gone through and make those type of assessments to figure out what is necessary to get us down to more of a brass knuckles approach to providing services at the least cost? Because if you get these money coming in, that's great, but you have some other things going on. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'll just start out by saying, we were cutting when cutting wasn't cool back before most people, besides the former Senate president and the current majority floor leader, were talking about the pension issues. We were dealing with those escalating pensions. So it's been, I think, a fair process, and Jim will tell you that for the counties too, for the jail expenses, that it's an every year process for us constitutionally, just like you all have to balance your budget, that we're looking at cutting those expenses and doing it in a more efficient way. And we've been doing that for more than a decade, dealing with the pension issues. But there was a real intense examination, Representative Fleming, when the pandemic started, because most of them were going through their fiscal year 21 budget, and most of them anticipated up to a 20 or 30% decrease in revenues based on what economists were telling us. And so as they were constructing their budgets with that amount of decrease, there really was an examination. There was a lot of attrition. We didn't see in cities a ton of layoffs of personnel. Most of the delivery of those services come through personnel, but we did see a lot of attrition with retirements. They're going to have to engage in that process too if they really treat this even more deliberatively, again, in looking at this money, so that they don't try to utilize one-time monies for ongoing operational expenses where you don't have a system of revenue to continue to pay for that. But I think it's an ongoing process.
If you don't mind interject, just
sure.
That's my next question. I'm glad you mentioned that. So what assurances are they going to go through in making sure that this one-time money won't incur significant ongoing maintenance costs? Because if you do that, obviously it can lead to other things and look at tax increases and those sorts of things.
That's an excellent point. And the guidance does not, the U.S. Treasury guidance does not address that. So what I think the role that, because it's a city or county that's directly accountable back to Treasury, as opposed to any other oversight body, you're going to see a more intensive training effort from the ad districts, the league, CAECO, and others. One, I have great faith in the competency of local officials to engage in that analysis, but you're going to continue to see training on that, I think, from all of those entities as local governments look to a resource to help them through there. But there's nothing in the law that requires that analysis.
But there's going to be some significant training that's going to go through and make sure they're mindful of that?
Yeah, we're already, from a city perspective, I can tell you we're already doing that.
Jim?
I would assume that in the course of training about the uses of the funds that we'll talk about those things. But I think to highlight JD's point, I mean, quite honestly, those are local decisions, and we tend to trust the local elected officials, counties and county judges, mayors, to be thoughtful about that. You know, those folks are elected by the same folks that elect everybody here in this room, and so we tend to trust the local control issue on that first. I mean, if a county official or city official was not prudent enough to make a decision with regard to the long-term impacts on their budgets with these funds, they probably would not have been that prudent prior to COVID relief funds or after. So it's tough to make sure that our role is not to be overly parochial at our association level to tell a county what they should or shouldn't do. But I think most of our county officials are very cognizant of the long-term implications. Again, broadband, water, sewer, those are the kind of things that when you're talking about spending this money on infrastructure, you've got to be having a conversation about what's it going to cost to maintain this system? What's it going to cost to operate this system? And so I would hope those conversations happen simultaneously.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chair Mills.
Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. I just want to compliment you on the kind of the patient walk through this with your clientele, with counties and cities. I think it's really prudent that we set back and we make sure we spend this money properly, and that the county officials, the city officials understand exactly where that money's being spent. And I think probably the majority of us up here are going to say we want those in, rubber meets the road government services and long-term long-term things like water and sewers. So I know this is taking up a lot of y'all's time and resource communicating back and forth, but I think it's important that we don't squander these monies. With that said, I've had a couple of my county judges and mayors have texted me and asked some questions, but kind of two unique questions. I've got a couple of counties that are underserved medically. They're wanting to recruit a doctor or a dentist. Have you had that question asked as far as can monies be used to recruit medical? You know, you talked about public health, and what's your thought on that?
Well, it gets around the edges of the gray. Those are those kind of questions that we get asked quite frequently as well, and it sounds like a broken record to tell our county officials, but I think we have to wait and see if that question gets answered definitively enough nationally that you feel confident that you can do that and not have those clawback concerns that JD talked about. So when it's not black and white, I have been very careful to tell county officials, you've got to be able to give an account for this. And again, not to necessarily this body or even the electorate, but to a potential federal U.S. Treasury Inspector General or someone who comes in. I mean, I had a counterpart in Georgia, the Association of Counties director there, who said that one of the counties down there did get an actual Inspector General inquiry on the CARES Act use of funds because of a citizen complaint or what have you, that they were using it for something that wasn't eligible. They turned out to be fine because, again, CARES Act, the presumptions got very broad, which is what we're hopeful that things like that, because of public health. I've had county officials ask about, can we build a park to encourage more outdoor recreation and public health benefits? I know Dr. Alvarado appreciates those kind of conversations where it legitimately could be, the case could be made that this is a reaction that we've been in our houses for 16 months. We've been, people have put on the COVID-19 or more in some cases, and that getting back out and exercising and all your health could be a legitimate excuse or rather a definition for something that might sound like it's on the edge. But again, until we get something from the Treasury on that, we're very cautious about it.
And one more follow-up. Has there been money set aside for auditing the way these funds are spent? Is it already specifically set out in the bill?
Well, these funds are eligible to be used to pay for the audits. And most counties, and we didn't touch on that, will have a single audit. And cities are a little different.
It'll implicate, we know 70 cities that typically aren't implicated based on their distributions will have to do the single audit. And because it's combined with other federal funds, we suspect that there'll be many more than 70 doing a single audit. But as Jim pointed out, you can use these ARPA funds to pay for the audit.
I think every county will receive enough to trigger a single audit, except for maybe one or two. And so we have already trained our county officials on preparing for single audits. Lots of counties have never gone through a single audit. It's a lot more stringent in terms of the federal oversight in those audits. So, but yes.
So that should give us some comfort that the money's going to be spent well, I would think. So.
Yeah, that in addition to just general faith in local officials.
That's right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Representative Bray.
Thank you all. JD, I want to thank KLC specifically. I had seen a list of some cities that hadn't turned in their budget certifications, and 3 of my cities were on there. And so when I contacted them, they had all said KLC's already been on them, making sure that they get that money. So thank you for that. My question is for Mr. Henderson. So a couple of my counties don't have water and sewer services or broadband services, so I'm kind of scratching my head thinking, how are they going to use this money? But they've had a significant decrease in jail revenue just because they don't have the state inmates anymore. And frankly, we all know that's, for a county, kind of their biggest drain right now. Is there any talk through the Treasury regs or anything about the possibility of getting some help on jail relief?
Well, and you represent Madison, a part of Madison as well, so you know our president, Judge Taylor. And so the jail issue kind of cuts both ways in the pandemic. For those counties who house state inmates, and some of you all have counties that do that, you're right. The decline in inmate population, which is a whole other conversation for maybe another day, Representative Fleming, about efficiencies and things that, we may have learned a lot about that in this process. I know video arraignment, other things, but so for those counties that actually had a reduction in the population and they are dependent on that revenue, theoretically they would qualify. But again, JD touched on this kind of convoluted formula that we have to make sure it fits within. But if the revenue was down as a result of the payments for inmates being down, that theoretically could be lost revenue that could be recovered. For counties who house their inmates with another county, because of just, again, the overall reduction in inmates, it actually probably created a benefit to their budget, a slight benefit, by not having to have those incarceration costs. So on the lost revenue side, there is some help. Interestingly, and I don't want to get in the weeds, it's just way down in some of these guidelines, but there's a lot of discussion. Again, I know Dr. Alvarado's been involved in this, others, the mental health discussion, behavioral health issues that ultimately lead to incarceration and other things. And there's a lot in there about that. I know some of the counties that have been pretty forward thinking about what the solution is long term to incarceration issues are having conversations about that. So there's opportunity, I think, for jail in the general areas of jail discussion, but in terms of just filling a hole in a systemic problem, probably not.
Thank you.
Other questions from members of the committee? I don't see any, but I'm going to finish up with one question. It got brought up in that last discussion, and I may need Billy for this too. But as far as budget certifications go, do we know how many cities have not submitted at this point in time, and if there's still an opportunity for them to get those in?
At this point,
come on up. Just identify yourself for the record, Billy, and then let us know on that.
I'm Billy Johnson, Executive Director for Federal Grants with Department for Local Government. Right now on the totals for the cities, out of 405, we have 370 that have turned in. We did set a few guidelines in the beginning for June 2nd, and then we extended it last week to Friday. If there are still some trickling in, we are not going to decline anybody from sending in a budget certification. One of the big holdups for our cities right now is for those that have not obtained DUNS numbers or SAMS numbers. And for us to be able to process their payment through the state, we have to have a tax ID and a DUNS number from them. But right now, we're at 370 on the total.
460 or
405 is what U.S. Treasury deemed eligible for the appropriations.
Okay. Thanks, Billy. I appreciate that. And to Jim and JD's point, the idea of the responsibility being on local officials here, that's not something that we take for granted, because obviously the federal government, in making these allotments and doing what they have done, has put that responsibility mostly with the local officials. We want to know how this process is going to work, so we can, because we're being asked questions by our county and city officials as well, but we also know that the state doesn't have a big role in this oversight. It's just a matter of us being aware of what's going on. So we appreciate that, and I think it needs to be said that the federal act has put that responsibility back on the local governments, and they obviously have faith in cities and counties using that money properly. Any questions from our Zoom participants real quick? I will ask that too. All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next presenters, which are the group with state allotments and their discussion about water, sewer, and other projects. Secretary Gray, Director Hicks, I see you in the back of the room. Sandy and Ray, I think. If you all would just identify yourselves for the record, and then you may proceed with your presentations.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Gray, and first things first, I will ask the chair I know you have the unpopular role of being the timekeeper. So in order for us to get a sense of how much we need to shrink wrap what we've got, what sort of time do we have?
We probably need to be, 11:30, 11:45, Cheryl? So we've probably got
Okay.
about 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay,
Secretary.
great. Thank you, sir. Well, again, first things first, let me thank you, Mr. Chair, the chairs of the interim committee, and all the members, and especially for your public service. I think that's first things first. Let me also introduce the folks who are involved in the project, and then I'm going to put a little context of why I'm here, why Budget Director Hicks is here. But first, serving both the water and wastewater projects as project director is Deputy Secretary from Public Protection Ray Perry, and along with a really high functioning group that you all know from the Department of Local Government, Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, is Sandy Williams, and from Dennis Keene's shop at DLG, we've got General Counsel Matt Stevens is involved in the project and active, Eddie Jacobs, and Brian Bunch. So, with that in mind, let me give you a little bit more context, and that is why Budget Director Hicks, John Hicks, and I are involved in the project. Well, the governor saw this assignment, this consensus between the administration and the legislature as a top priority. And when he asked both of us to join the project along with Kerry Harvey for the education projects, he did that because he recognized that you had assigned that authority, you had given that authority to the administration, and he wanted to bring the best talent he could as resources and reinforcement. Now, you all know that the KIA is a very robust organization itself, but as John Hicks has said, it's a small agency. And so we wanted to bring as many resources to the table. The governor wanted to bring as many resources to the table as we could from the full administration. I look at my own background. My business and business career has been about project management, about problem solving, about taking large and complex projects that may be presented to us and breaking those down into more manageable steps. And so what I'd like to do today is take you through the water and wastewater project and what really represents the scope of that project. Now, you've already heard from JD and Judge Henderson on the federal allocation, the direct allocation, that bucket. And what I'm going to do is talk about drinking water and wastewater. But for the context of both water and wastewater and broadband, what this slide represents is the allocation. And what we have are $250 million for water and sewer projects and $250 million for unserved and underserved broadband areas, and $50 million for securing economic development opportunities for commercial and industrial customers. So that's the broad context of what we're going to be addressing in the time that we've been given. Okay, so Sandy, let's go to the next slide. So this is the drinking water and wastewater. I'm going to do basically the who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much. I already talked about the how much, but we're going to break that down a little bit more discreetly in just a minute. What's the program? The Drinking Water and Wastewater Grant Program includes the design, the planning, the construction for water and sewer-related projects that have a social, economic, or environmental impact. Funded by the American Rescue Plan of 2021, the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund, as contrasted with what JD and Jim were just talking about, of course, that bucket being the local bucket. It's appropriated, as you know, in the 2021 regular session of the General Assembly, Senate Bill 36, appropriated to the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority for management, for administration. So how much money do we have? Again, $250 million for water and wastewater. Of that $250 million, the way it's broken down is this: $150 million pool is allocated by county population. And we've got that in case you all need it, or I believe the committee is already, if you have those numbers. Another $50 million is for unserved drinking water customers in rural areas and for those federal consent decree areas. That would be Lexington, Louisville, Northern Kentucky Sanitation District Number 1, and Winchester. $49.9 million to round it up, to get us up to the 250 total, is allocated to supplement a project grant where the cost may be greater than the county's allocation, or where cost escalations have occurred due to changed conditions. All right. So, what's the project scope? Number of potential projects are 350. Is great. In fact, could be greater than 350. Today, as of today, and I'll probably speak to this again, we've received 127 grant applications, and they amount to more than $300 million already. So we have the either the benefit or the burden of already being oversubscribed. That represents 121 in each county, 269 number of unserved drinking water projects, potentially, 4 federal consent decree utilities, and in terms of number of utilities, eligible would be 713 altogether. That's public drinking water utilities and public wastewater utilities. Okay, how will the utilities apply? This is already underway as of June the 1st. They'll be utilizing the Water Resource Information System, WRIS, which is already, of course, already stood up process within KIA, which again, the benefit of water and wastewater is KIA has these systems and processes already in place. This represents a surge of projects, but the good news is that the processes, the systems are already in place, including the WRIS project profile system. Utilities will apply by coordinating with the Water Management Council in the AD districts. The Water Service Coordinator in the AD districts will help the utilities complete the project profile. Again, already now we're 15 days into that process being implemented. The Water Service Coordinator will select the Cleaner Water Program grant program as the funding source under the budget tab. That's basically just a procedural piece of things. Okay, when can the utilities apply? Already applying, effective June the 1st. And that, just to confirm, that was what the governor announced originally as the schedule. So it's on schedule in terms of the applications. Okay, let's go to the next one, Sandy. Okay, how will the projects be selected? In the $150 million pool, they'll be selected through coordination between the utilities, the cities, and the counties. The $50 million pool, that's the unserved and the federal consent decree areas, will be evaluated based on the number and type of projects that check the box, that comply. That is, unserved drinking water customers in the rural areas and the federal consent decree areas, Lexington, Louisville, Northern Kentucky, Winchester. $49.9 million pool, roughly, again, rounded 50 million, gets us up to 250 million total. $25 million is designated for cost escalations and change conditions. Now, it's no news to any of you all here that we're experiencing, of course, material price increases today, and generally across the board, construction price increases and escalations. So we've reserved this amount for cost escalations, change conditions, and situations where the scope may change or the cost may change from the engineer's original estimate when the work's being engineered, the design work, and when bids are taken. And $24.9 million to supplement a project grant. As JD and Jim mentioned, we're under the same constraints in terms of scheduling, all funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024. But I would say, just like JD said, that that's a very realistic number for the kinds of projects that are being considered, and it gives the local jurisdictions, utilities, the ad districts, the KIA, the time, and the engineer to do the work that's contemplated. Again, the good news is that right out of the gate, they're oversubscribed already in terms of applications, the volume of those applications. And finally, the projects will be selected based on WRIS, evaluating the social, economic, and environmental criteria. The next slide, actually, the next two slides just illustrate a process diagram, basically just illustrating how we get the projects done, following best practices and just good project management. I won't go through each of these steps, but if you're curious about it or interested in it, happy to talk about it. I've already gone through these steps, but this is just to show this slide and the next slide show the step-by-step in the process of executing the projects. Okay. When will the grant funding be available? And I can say that after the federal program guidance is finalized, that's the interim guidance we already have that interim guidance. That's what JD and Jim were talking about earlier. They've got it for the local program. We've got it for the state program. After the federal funding is received, and we have, I believe we're roughly half of that today. Is that right, John? Yes. Thank you, sir. After the funding will be available after administrative regulations are executed. We can put a check by that box. They have been executed. And after the county allocation amounts are released, and we can put a check by that box. That has been done. What's left to do? Coordinate with the area development districts. That work's underway. Also coordinating, of course, with elected officials. That engagement is underway as we speak. Reviewing the final federal guidance. We have the interim guidance. We'll be awaiting, and there's a dynamic to that, of course, but that's moving as expected. And then finalizing grant commitment letters and grant assistance agreements. And then finally is to getting what is left to do is to get the projects underway and completed by the target end of December of 2024. Mr. Chair, that's our presentation. I tried to shrink wrap it as much as I could. There's a lot of work to be done. That's the good news.
I think you did well.
Well, thank you, sir. But unfortunately I got Ray here and Sandy here to help with as subject matter experts as you all understand. We all understand with any questions that we've got.
Questions from members of the committee? I see none.
Going.
Secretary Hicks, I do have a question for you real quick. If you don't,
John has
Director Hicks.
He has actually a presentation
okay.
next. All right, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My question, and it goes back to something we talked about in some of the previous discussions that we've had today. I think we had gotten between 2.3 and 2.4 million total in the state allotment on ARPA. Is that correct?
$2,183,000,000.
Okay, I was a little over, but close. And so far we've appropriated about 1.3 of that.
About 1.2.
1.2. Okay,
yeah.
I was close.
You're very close.
On that. The discussion with regard to the Chapter 75 fire districts and EMS areas and things like that, would there be any chance for them to be able to apply for some state allotment at all? We talked about the opportunity for them to ask the counties or cities possibly, and still don't have a full idea of whether that will work or not, but you have any idea of that from the standpoint of the state allotment?
Well, they were correct in saying any jurisdiction who is a recipient, state, county, cities. We're all following the same rules. And so public safety is an eligible entity described explicitly as being one area in which premium bonus pays are allowable. So the answer is yes. Any governmental unit who's a recipient is a potential, can be asked, if you will. Of course, the General Assembly ultimately will appropriate these funds. But yeah, they've got all of those governmental entities to ask.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you don't have a whole lot of time, and we've gone through some of this with some of you on other committees. So I'll try to summarize, as well as I can, so that you can have questions. But the Broadband Deployment Fund, you all created a statute in the 2020 session that created the Broadband Deployment Fund within the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority as a framework ready to be funded. Well, it was funded through appropriations by the General Assembly, $300 million of the American Rescue Plan State Fiscal Recovery Fund going to the Broadband Deployment Fund, $250 million identified for unserved and underserved areas, and with only $50 million of that available to be awarded by next April of 2022. And I would say that because of the limitation on that first $50 million, we've decided to aim that $50 million at unserved broadband areas, even though broadly underserved is also an eligible use of the funds. And then another $50 million for securing economic development opportunities to the extent that we have that opportunity, working closely with the Economic Development Cabinet to keep an eye on prospects there. Next. And so in your statute, the Deployment Fund assists governmental agencies and private sector entities to construct infrastructure for the deployment of broadband service to underserved and unserved areas, and to provide broadband services, to who? To residential, commercial, and industrial customers. In the federal rule, it's households and businesses who are the intended recipients of broadband service to be funded through the infrastructure built through these funds. Next. So part of the statutes you all set out, and then you modified them in the 21 session through House Bill 320 and House Bill 382, set definitions. One correction on here, both with the final rule, that broadband is not going to be fixed wireless, it's wireline or fixed terrestrial. And you all set out some speed capacities, download, upload. There's a process in the statute about a grant application, the requirement of 50% match. And then in the 21 session, you all modified that provision that permitted local governments, cities and counties, who could use the federal funds we just heard about if they want to contribute to the 50% match requirement for broadband deployment projects. So you all were very thoughtful in understanding the prospect of blending these one-time infrastructure funds from a local level to the funds appropriated by you at the state level. Next. So federal guidance, you've heard read testimony on that, issued in May 10, 150 pages. Just as a comment, I thought you had some very good advice from the speakers before me. If you're a local official and you want to understand what can I do, read those 150 pages, because like you do when you issue an administrative reg, there's a whole lot of those 150 pages are, why are we doing this? It's not the rules themselves, it's the predicate. And you can get a lot of information out of that. It is gray, but I look at it because it tells me the motivation behind it. So I would commend anybody who wants to understand well how to use these funds, read that. It's somewhat like a research document with all kinds of footnotes. But it tells you what they're thinking. It won't answer every question, and they're not going to answer every question in this guidance. So it's going to be up to the elected officials in the jurisdictions, to wisely interpret those things and to be able to document. They put out a framework that says, draw the line from here to here on your logic train, and as long as it meets it, you're going to be in better shape. So I'll just a commentary on, we at state and local governments want discretion from the federal government. We got it. And so, and they're not going to tell us all what to do. And so we're going to have to live with that gray. So the guidance on the broadband, a couple of changes to our state statute. Number one was a broadband deployment project funded with those dollars has to meet the speed test of 100 megabytes per second download and upload. right? That was a bit of a surprise that the upload speed was that much, only with exceptions to topography, excessive cost, or geography, but it's got to be scalable to 100 meg upload. So that's the baseline, right? Won't fund a project that doesn't go to go slower than that. So our process sequence, as I had mentioned, at our budget review and appropriations revenue, we're initiating a request for information to seek input from providers, municipalities, anybody who's interested, because we're building a brand new program from ground up. Kentucky's never put out funds for a broadband deployment, and so we're at the very beginning, unlike the Water Resources Information System, which has been in place for many years in a really good structured process. We're establishing a process for that $250 million with a focus in the initial stage of that $50 million to be awarded by next April. So that's going to be out in a number of days from now. And so we'll do as much as we can to widely broadcast availability of that. We're basically asking people to give us input as we develop this RFP, the application, the grant program itself. Part of that, and then we're going to have a two-stage RFP process. Our statute requires an RFP process. And so we're going to have an initial notice of intent to apply with an initial map. A map of what? A map of eligible unserved areas, given the data that we have. And we know we don't have all the data. We have the FCC's data. We have data from the Rural Development Opportunity Fund grant award that the FCC had provided. We have data from the Commonwealth's exercise on the crowdsourced internet speed mapping. You can click online and identify where you are, and it'll measure how fast your broadband is. And so we're using that to kind of fill in these gaps, because the FCC data is by census block and says that any entity that has broadband service in a census block means the census block is covered. Well, we know that's not true, and the FCC knows that's not true. So we're trying to fill in the gaps. Your all's House Bill 382, sought that we'd identify, the most unserved and small geographic areas within a census block. So if there's an application ultimately that is a partial set of residences and businesses in a census block that is served in other parts of the county, but is unserved, it can be shown to be unserved in that part of the county, then it's an eligible project area, which gets to the intention you all have, which is to get to unserved and ultimately underserved areas for broadband. So we're going to have initial map that we expect to be modified by the responses to that initial RFP stage one. There is a process in the statute about challenge. No, a provider says, I can prove that I am serving that area, or I will within 12 months. And so there's a process in law for that. And we're going to make determinations, and then we'll go to stage two, which is a kind of a longer application that basically gets to the project specifics. Where are you? How much will it cost? Lots of information about the applicant, lots of information about the service to be provided, about the speed, about the potential cost, those kinds of things. And there's a challenge process to each application so that other providers can say, no, that's my area and I can prove it. Or as I say, we'll have modified the map by then to determine the all eligible unserved areas. So we'll go through all of that, evaluation and scoring and awards. It's a necessarily technical and deliberative process, and one in which this is the first time the Kentucky state government's been involved. So we're being urgent but deliberative about our process. Next, Sandy. And so how will they be selected? You all modified your state statute with House Bill 382 and said, for this pot of money, we want projects in unserved areas where other money is inadequate or other money is currently designated. So we don't want to be redundant of a federal award that's already been provided and work is being done or will be done. Projects that reach customers least economical to serve, well, we're putting the first $50 million to unserved. When you talk about the marketplace and the commercially infeasible way to get to that house at the end of the county road, that's an unserved area. That's the least economical to serve. That's the reason the government's putting their resources into this, is to help lower the capital cost of getting broadband to those areas. Some other provisions that we'll put in project attributes, the may provide incentive for timely completion was something you all have in the statute. Next. Timelines, the RFI is going to be out really, really soon. The stage one application is going to be July. so that we have time to take input from that RFI and use it to improve the process that our core group is currently working on in developing the application. I think that's it. A couple of things to do. We're going to have some E-regs that will have to do that. And I'll make this comment, the statutes that you all passed were very good statutes. I've been watching state statutes and broadband deployment, throughout the last couple of years, and it's a well-written statute. We won't have a whole lot of new stuff in the regulations, that isn't in the application. So just to let you know, we'll finalize that initial eligible map after that first stage, and then we'll put out the full RFP for the application. So it's a very exciting prospect. You all did a nice job in getting ready for this in the 2020 session. Little did we know that the federal government was going to come in with a whole lot of resources that would able to basically finance the policy that you all set forth in 2020. So while Kentucky's new to it, the steps that you all have taken preceding this point, really are enabling us to be able to move forward in the near term.
Co-Chair Mills.
Thank you, Director Hicks. Just a question from past testimony that you had given. I needed some clarity as far as RDOF funds. So are projects that are receiving RDOF funds, will they also receive state funds or be qualified for these state funds? If you could clarify that.
Yeah, will. They potentially won't qualify. Okay. Because the intention of the one of the provisions, in your all statutes and in recent House bills was to not be redundant of funds already going to a project area. So we have that information from the federal government. We know what areas received funds from that RDOF, FCC auction that happened and it was awarded, at the end of the last calendar year. Now, you all have in there a provision that says if they are awarded or if they're inadequate. So I don't want to rule out the hypothetical that the funds that the RDOF provided were inadequate. That's a bar where they'd have to get over, but it's hypothetically possible.
Right. And just to a quick follow-up, I was going to point that out. In Western Kentucky, we have a large project that I'm sure you're going to see or have seen. The RDOF funds are inadequate to meet a large area of unserved need. So that was the basis of my question. Is it's a large project, and I'd like to personally see that those funds were commingled, but I understand your response as well. So thank you.
Representative Bray.
Yeah, I've just got a question on the $50 million for economic opportunity. I know that wasn't in your presentation, but you had mentioned it earlier. Mm-hmm. Is this infrastructure investment? Is it is it just cash payment for recruitment? What exactly is that?
Sure. First, it's part of the Broadband Deployment Fund, so it's definitely for the construction of broadband infrastructure. I focused here in where there might be economic development opportunities. Let's just say we got a greenfield site out there in which there's going to be an industry that can move in and needs broadband service as far as they would need water and sewer and electric. So that's the intent there. It's still to be the construction of broadband infrastructure.
Representative Donahue, I think you're online and had a question.
My question has been answered. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Representative Roberts.
Thank you. This is probably for both you and for Secretary Gray. Just in looking at sort of the flow chart here, I understand that your departments are set up to handle the trickle in of these projects and the normal cadence. And I'm concerned that there's going to be this crush of projects coming your way and the oversight of them and those checkpoints, like as I look at this flow chart where there's a need for environmental review, those kinds of things. So I was just hoping you could talk a little about how your departments are set up to handle the crush of these applications as they come in.
Well, the lady sitting to my left, Sandy Williams, the Deputy Director of Infrastructure Authority, is going to be, the catcher's mitt for, all of these applications. And so on the water and sewer side, I know it's going to be a surge, but it's something they're very used to. The good thing about the federal guidance on water and sewer was it tracked the wastewater and drinking water revolving loan funds that they administer. So, we didn't have to worry about, are we doing something different here? So that was very good. So one of the things that I know the governor would say is we're going to make sure there are resources there that help the infrastructure authority with their work. Now, they've got expertise in there on water and sewer that nobody can help. They don't need the help in that regard because they know exactly what they're doing. But let's just get to the issue of broadband for a minute and talk about, evaluating, getting information on all those applications. We're going to likely have to pull together some folks, who, in addition to the infrastructure authorities, to help put that together, because it's not been done before, and they don't have the expertise built up there as well. So just like Secretary Gray said, why are he and I and others kind of involved in the development? I see something very similar happening with helping the infrastructure authority, particularly as it relates to the broadband fund, simply because it's exactly what you said. This is, we're going to get an explosion of applications. I hope we do. It'll be a good problem to have, and we're going to have to resource, for that.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned at some point in your briefing an initial eligible map. I caught that term. We talk about unserved and underserved areas, but I've never seen a map of what unserved and underserved areas are. Is that what that's going to be?
Yeah, we're putting one together. No, that's exactly right. And this initial map is going to be unserved because of the first 50 million, but we're getting the data to do both.
Great.
Under and underserved. And those sources, the FCC's, reports that the providers give them on a quarterly basis, the Rural Development Opportunity Fund award, the Connect America Fund Phase 2 award, and as well as our crowdsourced internet data. We're going to use to really fill in some details. And so think of that as a draft map. And then have the providers, the municipalities, others come in and make it better. Identify where it's correct, identify where it's incorrect, so that we can then put out the full map and say, here are the unserved areas that are eligible for projects to apply to the fund.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but do you have a guess as far as the timeline to get that done?
Well, we're gonna have a short RFI response period. Because this has kind of been out there for a while, but we got a particular set of questions we're interested in those people maybe giving us some information on. So then we'll put out stage one. So the most important thing is to put out the initial map anyway. Right. And then we're going to have a period of time in which that map is corrected and modified so that then the full second RFP stage can go out there. So I would say we're not too far away from putting that first map out there and saying, have at it. Tell us what's correct or incorrect about it, and give us the data that proves that. And so that's why we wanted to do it, because this is our first foray. We chose that approach, that two-stage approach, rather than just assume we've got it all right from the get-go on the initial map.
Yeah, that should be interesting, the responses you get back on that. But thank you. That's great. I think it's a great thing. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Hicks, a follow-up on that. Could you provide that to the committee or a link to that once you all have it?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want to provide it to everybody. I mean, because it really is, I find it really interesting myself. And, it really has a very technical, programmatic purpose here. But it's also an exhibition of, how that crowdsourcing internet speed survey, what its results were, which, it's, if you will, you'll know your county and you'll nod your head about that.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hicks, I know we had a lively discussion in the A&R, and I just want to make sure that even though some of my harsh comments weren't directed toward you, it's a matter of the whole process and situation when it comes to procurement. I just want to make sure you're aware of that because I don't really follow up with you after the meeting. But obviously, procurement is really important, and to get the public sector involved and so forth. I do want to ask you, just to follow up with Representative Johnson's comments on the map, I got the impression your comments a second ago that the private sector is going to be included in developing the map, and I assume you might get some NDAs from them so you can get a really complete picture of that. And then dovetailing with that, it goes to the underserved. I think underserved is basically defined as 25 down and 3 up. Mm-hmm. Is there any other information that further defines underserved, like social demographics and such?
No, it does not. Our state statute is exactly as you just specified, the 25 and 3.
Right.
And which is also consistent with the U.S. Treasury's interim final rule on terms of underserved. The 25 and 3 is also their standard, but no other elements that are incorporated.
Okay. And one more question, Mr. Chairman. Just for this committee, because I know I got the responses and your comments on the Kentucky Wire. Could you explain to the committee the involvement, if any at all, with Kentucky Wire during this process? Because I know we had a good discussion about that in the A&R. I want to make sure the committee is aware of that, because I know several folks are here about concerned about their involvement.
Sure. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Representative Fleming. One of our members of our core group is an employee of the Kentucky Communications Network Authority, and we reached out to him because he is the subject matter expert. So this gentleman has worked in the telecommunications industry prior to his work with the Commonwealth Office of Technology and helping to run the state's network contract, and then came over to the Kentucky Communications Network Authority. So he's serving as someone who's assisting us and who understands the business of internet service provision. So and just like Secretary Gray said, we're reaching out to resources elsewhere in the administration to kind of put some heads and hands together. So that's its purpose. And as you all know, in the state statute, you created, that no monies in the fund shall be used or transferred to the Kentucky Communications Network Authority. So those are restrictions will be completely complied with.
We have hit the end of our time. Director Hicks, thank you all for being here, all of you all for the presentations. We will have our next meeting.
July.
Next meeting date is pending at this point in time.
July the 20th.
July the 20th, Co-Chair Mills, who will be chairing that. July the 20th, same time, same place. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Got a motion from Representative Reed, a second. All in favor? We are adjourned.